Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today I will be taking you through part 5 of my coverage on the Meredith Kercher case. This video will more so be just focusing on the trial procedures in this case. There were a lot of trials. So we do have a lot of information to go through and I don't want to waste any time, so let's dive right in. On November 6, 2007, precautionary arrests were made against Raffaele Sollecito, Amanda Knox, and Patrick Lumumba. In Italy, precautionary arrest refers to a measure that can be imposed by a judge before a final conviction, allowing for pretrial detention or other restrictions to prevent flight risk, reoffending, or evidence tampering. After their arrests, they are each assigned a lawyer that same day. The next day, the families would hire new attorneys. Raffaele's family would retain Luca Maori and Giuliana Bongiorno. They wasted no money on Raffaele's defense. In 2004, Bongiorno had successfully gotten the former Italian Prime Minister Giuliano Andreotti acquitted of his lengthy mafia association charges on appeal. Amanda's family would hire Carlo Della Vedova, a lawyer that was more reasonably priced than Raffaele's, and Della Vedova had zero experience dealing with criminal cases. But Della Vedova spoke fluent English, and the Knoxes trusted them more than they trusted Amanda's assigned lawyer, Luciano Gagara. Meredith's family hired a lawyer as well, Francisco Maresca, and I am so sorry. I know I've been pronouncing his name wrong this entire time. If you couldn't tell by my accent, I am obviously American and I'm from the South. So, Italian, not my forte. On November 8th, Amanda, Raffaele, and Patrick went before Judge Claudia Madanini. The three, mostly Amanda and Patrick, were believed to be flight risks, so the cautionary arrest order was upheld, and the three were remanded to the Kapani prison pending official charges. Amanda and Patrick's arrests were upheld by lack of an alibi and Amanda's confession that implicated both of them. During the hearing, Raffaele told the judge, "I wish to never see Amanda again." But he did go back on the story of Amanda spending the night of the murder at his apartment. Raffaele's cautionary arrest order was granted on the belief that the bloody shoe prints at the crime scene matched the Nike shoes Raffaele had been wearing at the time of his arrest. At his cautionary arrest hearing, prosecution also stated that Raffaele was known to carry a small pocket knife, similar to one that could have been used in the crime. Prior to Meredith's murder, Raffaele was known to always carry around a small penknife. At the primary trial, Raffaele's friends and also his dad would testify, saying Raffaele always had the small knife on him and would pull it out any chance he got. He would use the knife to whittle little figures out of wood as well. The day before Raffaele was arrested, a wiretap phone call was recorded between Raffaele and his dad, Dr. Sollecito. Dr. Sollecito told Raffaele not to go to the police station with his little knife. It wasn't a good look. When Raffaele was arrested, he did have a knife on him that appeared to have blood on it. Later DNA tests showed that the knife had a DNA mixture of Amanda and Raffaele's on it. But this wasn't the small knife Raffaele was known to always carry. That small knife was never recovered or seen again. The fatal knife wound on the right side of Meredith's neck was only 1.5 centimeters long, zero point 0.4 centimeters wide, and zero point 0.4 centimeters deep. Many, including the judge in Amanda and Raffaele's 2009 trial, believe that this wound was inflicted by Raffaele's small knife or one similar to it. On November 23, 2007, Raffaele's defense would release a report questioning the validity of the bloody shoe print evidence. The shoe prints would eventually be proven to have come from Rudy's shoes, not Raffaele's. On November 16, 2007, another preliminary hearing would go before Judge Claudia Madanini, requesting a cautionary arrest order for Rudy Guede, based on fingerprint analysis collected at the crime scene. Madanini ordered Rudy's arrest. Though Rudy was nowhere to be found at this time, as he was on the run in Germany. None of the evidence at the crime scene implicated Patrick, and his alibi had been confirmed by a bar patron coming forward. 3 days later, on November 19th, prosecutor Giuliano Magnini would write a formal request to Judge Madanini requesting Patrick's cautionary arrest order to be revoked. In the request, Magnini stated he believed Amanda named Patrick in order to cover for her real accomplice, Rudy. The next day, November 20th, Patrick would be released. Coincidentally, Rudy would also be arrested that same day. He was stopped for being on a train without a ticket. After Rudy's arrest, he was held in a prison in Koblenz, Germany, until he was extradited back to Italy. On November 30th, Amanda and Raffaele would go before 3 judges, Massimo Riccarelli, Cecilia Bellalucci, and Lydia Brudi, to appeal their cautionary arrest orders. Their appeal was rejected, and they were ordered to remain in the Capani prison pending official charges. On December 6th, Rudy was extradited from Germany back to Italy. The next day, on December 7th, Rudy would go before Judge Madanini, the same judge who ordered his arrest and oversaw Amanda, Raffaele, and Patrick's cautionary arrest trials. Madanini upheld the cautionary arrest and remanded Rudy to the Capani prison, the same one Amanda and Raffaele were being held at. A week later, on December 12th, Rudy had an appeal hearing before the same 3 judges that oversaw Amanda and Raffaele's cautionary arrest appeal as well. And shocker to no one, Rudy's appeal is denied, and he is to remain in prison pending official charges. As is required by Italian law, motivation reports that outline the appeal court's reasoning behind their ruling for the cautionary arrest is released for each defendant. One for Amanda, one for Raffaele, and one for Rudy. The courts believed that there was enough circumstantial and direct evidence against each defendant that implicated them in Meredith's murder. In April 2008, Italy's Supreme Court, the Court of Cassation, reviewed the lower court's decision, and they confirmed the cautionary arrest for all 3 defendants and released a report for each defendant outlining their reasoning. They agreed with the lower court's decisions. And as we can already see, similar to the United States, Italy has checks and balances within their legal system to try to avoid wrongful detainment and wrongful convictions. And unlike the US, Italy is required to release a report after each court ruling that outlines the reason behind their decisions. The police's investigation was not complete until June 2008, and prosecution waited until the investigation was completed before bringing official charges. On July 11, 2008, Giuliano Magnini finalized charges against Rudy, Amanda, and Raffaele. The charges included 6 counts: murdering Meredith Kercher for unknown motives, carrying a large kitchen knife from Sollecito's apartment to the cottage, sexual assault against Meredith, stealing Meredith's phones, credit cards, and rent money, staging the break-in, and a separate charge solely for Amanda, for falsely accusing Patrick Lumumba of the crime. In August 2008, Lumumba's lawyer filed to attach themselves to the murder trial proceedings for Amanda's slander against Lumumba. This request was granted.
10 months after she was arrested, American student Amanda Knox had her first formal hearing to find out if she is to stand trial for murder. The 21-year-old from Washington State is accused of having been party to the stabbing death of her British roommate, who was also sexually assaulted. Knox's co-accused and former boyfriend did not appear in court, but a third suspect, Ivory Coast-born Rudy Guede, did show up. Well, a closed-door session was the last one before Amanda Knox and her 2 co-accused are committed for trial on a charge of murder. And in an emotional opening statement, Knox, speaking in English, denied the charges and accused Italian police of hitting her during interrogation. Lawyers for the defense said the prosecution laid out a scenario like from some crime novel. They claim Knox's boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, held Kercher from behind, Co-accused Rudy Herman Guede held the victim's arms and tried to have sex with her while Knox wielded a knife. Guede, who is of Ivory Coast origins, admits being in the apartment at the time of the killing, but says someone else did it. He reportedly fears Knox and Sollecito will try to cast all the blame on him. He was granted a separate fast-track trial, which could result in a lighter sentence. All three deny any wrongdoing.
On September 16th, 2008, Amanda, Raffaele, and Rudy are to go before Judge Paolo Micheli, but Raffaele chose not to attend this hearing. Unlike Amanda and Raffaele, Rudy didn't have any family or a support system to hire him outside help. His court-appointed attorneys, Walter Biscotti and Nicodemo Gentili, said that they began to feel like Amanda and Raffaele's defense strategy would be just to pin the entire crime on Rudy. At this preliminary hearing before Judge Micheli, they requested for Rudy to receive a fast-track trial, and this request is granted. Amanda and Raffaele are ordered to stand a pretrial. In Italy, you first have a pretrial where prosecution and defense will each present their case before a judge. From there, the judge will determine whether or not there is enough evidence to proceed to a primary trial. Italy does offer a fast-track trial option, where instead of the judge just determining whether or not there's enough evidence to proceed to a primary trial, the judge will determine your guilt or innocence of the crime then. Since the fast-track option saves the Italian legal system a considerable amount of time and money by not having to go through the expense of a full trial, they incentivize these by automatically reducing the amount of time you are to serve if convicted. Though Rudy opted for the fast-track option, the three would still be tried together in the same trial proceedings oversaw by Judge Micheli. The difference would be at the end of the trial. Rudy would immediately know his fate. Amanda and Raffaele would know if they were to face another trial. The trial proceedings were from September up until the end of October in 2008.
Good morning, Russ. Well, Amanda Knox and her Italian former boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, will go on trial in December on charges of murder and sexual violence, which carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. The verdict was announced by lawyers for the accused outside the court where the closed hearings were held. The prosecution charges that Kercher was killed when she refused to take part in a sex game. A third accused, Ivorian-born Rudy Guede, also left DNA traces and admitted being in the house where the murder took place, but denied guilt. He opted for a separate so-called fast-track trial, which won him 30 years instead of life.
On October 28, 2008, after deliberating for 12 hours, Judge Micheli and his court reached a verdict. They acquitted Rudy of robbery charges, but found him guilty of sexual assault and murder, sentencing him to 30 years. Micheli's court found sufficient evidence and ordered Amanda and Raffaele to stand trial on all charges. At the announcement of the verdict, Rudy remained impassive. His lawyers announced that they would appeal. Amanda bursted into tears. Her lawyer, Gagara, assured her that this was only the beginning and that they would keep fighting. Raffaele turned to his lawyers and asked, "So I can go home now? When will I be free?" Raffaele's still not getting it. 90 days after Micheli's verdict, he would release a 106-page long report outlining his reasoning behind the decision. In line with the prosecution's original theory, Micheli believed Meredith was killed by several attackers who were first intent on sexually abusing her and threatened her with a knife. Micheli believed the altercation spiraled out of control. Micheli's report stated the court believed that while Amanda and Raffaele were restraining Meredith, Rudy took advantage of the opportunity and either put his hand down Meredith's jeans or maybe removed her jeans and digitally assaulted her. Meredith's attackers likely panicked once she let out a loud scream, and they fatally stabbed her in response. Micheli believed that the DNA evidence, including Raffaele's on the bra clasp and Meredith and Amanda's DNA on the knife found in Raffaele's apartment, was valid. Micheli's report stated, "This court does not give credence to the contamination hypothesis, nor do the arguments seem at all convincing. Michele believed that the double DNA knife was the murder weapon, or at least one of them. Michele discounted the break-in in Philomena's room and believed it was staged. Michele did acknowledge that the rock could have been thrown into Philomena's room from the driveway and broken the window, but it would have been difficult to do so as Philomena had stated her shutters had been closed that night. While he did acknowledge that this was possible, he did not believe it was plausible, and his court came to the conclusion that the window was broken from inside the home, not outside. Michele also believed that the luminol traces of Meredith's DNA found in Philomena's room indicated that the room had been trashed after Meredith had already been attacked, and that whoever tracked Meredith's DNA into Philomena's room was the one who staged the break-in. And remember, it is Amanda's DNA that is mixed with Meredith's found in Philomena's room, lit up under luminol. Michele believed only an intruder that wasn't familiar with the home's layout would have chosen Philomena's room as their point of entry. And if a burglar was intent on just robbing the place, it would have been easier to break into the lower apartment that was accessible at the rear of the cottage. Rudy was familiar with Pergola 7 and most familiar with the lower level apartments. He was friends with the guys who lived there, and he had visited their apartment on multiple occasions. There was also an easier point of entry to the upper level apartment by climbing onto the terrace directly above the door to the lower level apartment. And if Rudy was breaking in for the purpose of just robbing the place, he probably would have known that all of the guys had gone out of town for the holiday weekend. So why not just break into the lower level apartment? Amanda and Raffaele's defense theorized that Rudy had broken into the upper level apartment earlier in the day when no one else was home. They believed that he was probably in the larger bathroom when Meredith had returned back home that night. Defense believed Rudy didn't flush the toilet as to not let his presence in the apartment be known. Michele stated that the larger bathroom was very close to the front door and to Philomena's room. If Meredith had returned home while Rudy was in the bathroom, it would have been easy for him to quickly run out the front door or escape out the window in Philomena's room. There was no sign of struggle anywhere else in the apartment, so Rudy, instead of fleeing, would have then had to cross the apartment to get to Meredith's room, now intent on sexually assaulting and murdering her instead of just robbing the place. Michele not only believed that the break-in was staged, but that someone had cleaned up the apartment and altered the crime scene in Meredith's room sometime after the murder had already occurred. Michele's report stated, "There are then logical arguments underpinning a cleanup activity. Seeing the lack of almost any fingerprints belonging to Mrs. Knox in the whole house, as if she was not living there, apart from one on a glass found in the kitchen. And despite the accused having represented that she had gone around through all the rooms that same morning, having a shower despite signs of acts of violence that she would have had to have noticed." Michele believed Amanda, Raffaele, and Rudy all attacked Meredith. It got out of hand, and it ended in Meredith's murder. Rudy's appeal trial began in November 2009, going before judges Giovanni Borracini and Maria Rita Bellardi. Rudy told the judges every time he closed his eyes, he saw red. He would say he was not the one who killed Meredith, but he didn't save her either, and that's the only thing he had to apologize for. He said he wanted the Kerchers to know that he didn't kill Meredith, and he didn't rape her either. At his first appeal, Rudy's sentence would be upheld, but reduced from 30 years to 24, and then once again discounted to 16 years, as an incentive for him choosing the fast-track trial. The appeal courts ruled that Rudy committed the murders along with Amanda and Raffaele. Rudy's final appeal would go before Italy's Supreme Court, the Court of Cassation, and it was unsuccessful. They would uphold the conviction, agreeing Rudy had committed the crime with Amanda and Raffaele. On January 16th, 2009, began the first day of Amanda and Raffaele's almost year-long primary trial. The trial would be oversaw by Judge Giancarlo Massi and Beatrice Cristiani. The case would be reviewed by both judges and a six-person lay jury. The first day of the trial, Raffaele looked pale and sat stone-faced. Amanda appeared calm and even happy at times. During court breaks, she smiled, joked, and laughed with her defense counsel and guards. Only two lawyers sat between Amanda and Raffaele, but the two previous lovers ignored each other on the advice of their attorneys. Amanda's bashfulness was something that was noticed by the prosecution, judges, jury, and the Kerchers. The second day of the trial wasn't until 3 weeks later. Unlike in the US, where hearings are held pretty close together and trials are wrapped up fairly quickly, it's not the same in Italy. There can be long breaks between hearings. Probably on the advice of her defense counsel, Amanda appeared less cheerful and relaxed in court this time around. The trial proceedings lasted almost an entire year. They listened to many witnesses and even toured the crime scene. Amanda testified in her own defense. Raffaele chose not to testify.
There were more than 40 hearings and 150 witnesses. One of them was Amanda herself.
They began to ask me the same questions that they had been asking me days and all these days ever since it happened. For instance, who could I imagine could be the person who killed Meredith? And I said I still didn't know. And so what they did is they brought me into another interrogation room. They called me a stupid liar, but I wasn't trying to protect anyone. So I didn't know how to respond to them. They said that I had left Raffaele's house, which wasn't true. They were putting this telephone in front of my face going, look at your message. You are going to meet someone. And when I denied that, they continued to call me a stupid liar. I was very, very scared because they were treating me so badly I didn't understand why. And during that time, I hadn't left his apartment. But they were insisting upon putting everything into hourly segments. And since I never look at the clock, I wasn't able to tell them what time exactly I did everything.
I couldn't understand why they were so sure that I was the one who knew everything. In my confusion, I started to imagine that maybe I was traumatized. They continued to say that I had met somebody, and they continued to put so much emphasis on this message that I had received from Patrick. Almost was convinced that I had met him, but I was confused. The declarations were taken against my will, and so everything that I said was said in confusion and under pressure, and because they were suggested by the public minister.
Era suggerito dal pubblico ministero.
Oh, chiedo scusa, alle 1:45 non c'era il pubblico ministero, c'era solo la polizia giudiziaria.
They also were pressuring me. They were suggesting the path of thought. They suggested the journey. Did you say? So the first thing I said, okay, Patrick. And then they said, okay, where did you meet him? Did you meet him at your house? Did you meet him near your house? And then my memories got mixed up. From other days, I remembered having met Patrick at Piazza Grimana. So I said, okay, Piazza Grimana. It wasn't as if I said, oh, this is how it went.
Back on November 10th, just 4 days after she falsely accused Patrick, Amanda was visited in prison by her mom, Etta. During the recorded visit, Amanda would describe the interrogation to her mother, where Amanda said she hadn't remembered sending a text back to Patrick the night of the murder and asked the police to show her the text again. Amanda said when she saw the text, that's when she suddenly had a memory of meeting Patrick at the basketball courts and that he was the one who murdered Meredith. Amanda then freaked out and emotionally accused Patrick of the crime.
When I thought of Patrick, I imagined something
only said it because I thought it
What
could
did you
be
say
true.
about Patrick?
I said, so what happened was everyone had left the room. By this time, one of the police officers was like, I'm the only one who can save you. I'm the only one who can save you. Just tell me a name. And I said, I don't know. And then they were like, I was like, can you show me the message that I got from Patrick? Because I didn't remember sending a message back to him. And so they showed me the message, and then I was like, Patrick. And then I thought of seeing Patrick, and I think I just totally spazzed out and imagined seeing him and
Seeing him where?
seeing him by a basketball court.
Okay.
And then in my house, I imagined going like this in the kitchen, because I could hear her screaming, but that's not true.
By the time the trial comes around, Amanda has changed her story and doesn't mention that she was the one who asked to see the text messages between her and Patrick, and instead says it was the police who kept putting the phone in her face and insinuating that it was Patrick she met that night. In Italian, Amanda would describe to the court how she was hit on the back of the head prior to accusing Patrick of the crime. During the primary trial, there were two prosecutors. Lead prosecutor was Giuliano Mignini, and assisting prosecutor was Manuela Commodi. At trial, both Mignini and Commodi would present the prosecution theory of the crime during the closing arguments. During the trial, Commodi played an animated video reenacting their theory of Meredith's murder. At first, Commodi was having technical difficulties when trying to play the video in court. Raffaele, who had just finished up his computer degree while in prison, got up and helped her play the video. Talk about doing things against your best interest. Mignini and Commodi differed on a couple small details, but they mostly presented the same theory. Mignini directly stated he believed the three were under the influence of drugs and probably alcohol too at the time the crime was committed. Commodi only implied the three were under the influence at the time of the murder. Now, this is the theory that was presented at the primary trial. On the night of November 1st, 2007, Amanda and Raffaele left Pergola 7 around 5 p.m. and took a walk around town before heading back to Raffaele's apartment to cook and eat dinner. Amanda and Raffaele got back to Raffaele's place and hung out for a bit. At 5:45 p.m., Joanna Popovic stopped by to ask Raffaele to drive her to the bus station at midnight to pick up a suitcase her mom was sending her from Milan. Both Amanda and Raffaele greeted Giovanna at the door. Raffaele agreed to take her. Giovanna then left to go to a music class. At 6:27 p.m., Amanda and Raffaele started streaming Amelie on Raffaele's computer. They cook and eat dinner before Amanda leaves to go to work. At 8:18 p.m., Patrick texts Amanda to not come in. When this text message comes in, cell tower location placed her near Via Ulisse, not at Raffaele's apartment. Prosecution believed when this text came in that Amanda was already heading into work or to go back home in order to get ready for work. Amanda then walks back to Raffaele's. Once there, she texts Patrick back at 8:35 p.m., saying, "Okay, see you later. Have a good night." Amanda deletes the text message from her phone and then turns her phone off for the rest of the night. Prosecution believed that sometime that evening, Amanda and Raffaele ran into Rudy and made arrangements to purchase drugs from him. Commodi believed Amanda and Raffaele ran into Rudy during their walk from Pergola 7 back to Raffaele's place earlier in the evening. Mignini theorized that Amanda ran into Rudy while walking back to Raffaele's after receiving Patrick's text saying she no longer had to go into work that night. Either scenario works with the timeline, but personally, I think that if Amanda did make a arrangement with Rudy that night to purchase drugs, it makes more sense that she would have done that later in the evening after finding out that she didn't have to go into work after all. Around 8:40 p.m., Giovanna Popovic stops by Raffaele's again, seeing both Amanda and Raffaele. Giovanna tells them that she didn't need the ride after all. Her mom wasn't able to send the suitcase. Amanda no longer having to work, and Raffaele no longer needing to do a favor for a friend, They both had plans to spend the rest of the night getting high, so they turned their phones off for the night. While all of this is going on, Meredith had spent the evening hanging out with her friends. At around 8:45 p.m., Meredith and Sophie walked part of the way home together, before parting ways to get to their respective homes. Meredith made it home around 9 p.m. Raffaele's last keystroke on his computer was at 9:10 p.m. Last activity recorded at 9:15. Prosecutors believed at this point Amanda and Raffaele left to meet Rudy at the basketball courts for the prearranged drug deal. Homeless man Antonio Curatolo saw Amanda and Raffaele multiple times the night of the murder, hanging out near the basketball court between 9:30 p.m. and midnight. Prosecution believed Amanda, Raffaele, and Rudy made it back to Pergola 7 around 11:20 p.m. that night. Outside the cottage, probably high on drugs and maybe alcohol too, the three come into contact with Harouk and Kokomani, who was driving down the road that passed Pergola 7 when he came across Amanda and Raffaele in the street. The interaction turned violent, with Kokomani saying he decked Raffaele in the face and that Amanda and Raffaele threatened him with knives before Rudy came up, offering cash to borrow Kokomani's car for the night in order to move some furniture. Kokomani drives off, leaving the three outside the home. Prosecution believed while this is going on, Meredith was in her room, presumably doing schoolwork, when the three entered. Rudy goes to use the larger bathroom. At some point, a fight breaks out between Amanda and Meredith about Meredith's missing rent money, theorizing that sometime earlier that day, Amanda had stolen the money, most likely to pay for drugs. Raffaele and Rudy, who both liked Amanda, back her up and attack Meredith too. In the video prosecutors played at court, it showed an animated Meredith and Amanda getting into a fight. Amanda grabbing Meredith by the neck and chin, shoving her mouth closed, and then knocking her into a wall. The prosecution's video also showed images of Meredith's actual bruises and showing how they match perfectly to Amanda's animated hands. The coroner, Dr. Luca Lawley, had testified that some of the finger-shaped bruises on Meredith were too small to be that of Rudy or Raffaele's, and were more consistent with coming from a female. The video shows Rudy entering the room. Both Rudy and Raffaele start to join in on Amanda's fight with Meredith. They believed the three undressed her, pulling off her jeans and underwear, and shoving her shirt above her chest. Magnini and Commodi would also differ slightly on when Meredith's bra was cut off. Both agreed it happened after she was stabbed. Magnini believed it was removed shortly after the stabbing, Raffaele cutting it off with his knife. Commodi theorized that maybe the bra was cut off when Amanda and Raffaele returned to the apartment to stage the scene, trying to make it look like an obvious sexual assault. Prosecution believed Raffaele used his pocket knife to threaten Meredith. Amanda grabbed a knife from the kitchen. At some point during the attack, Rudy digitally assaulted Meredith. Prosecution believed while Rudy and Raffaele were restraining Meredith, Amanda held a kitchen knife to Meredith's neck, taunting her with it, leaving small cuts. Meredith was able to let out a loud scream, and the trio panicked, and two knives were plunged into Meredith's neck, one on each side. Prosecution believed Rudy grabbed towels and tried to clot Meredith's bleeding, but the injuries were fatal. Amanda and Raffaele grabbed Meredith's phones and fled the apartment. Rudy left shortly after. After fleeing, Amanda and Raffaele throw Meredith's phones off an embankment at Parco St. Angelo, not far from Raffaele's apartment, and also not far from Rudy's apartment either. At 12:10 a.m., one of Meredith's phones briefly connected to the internet. Cell tower location now placed it in the vicinity of Via Sperandio, where the phones would be discovered the next morning. At some point, Amanda and Raffaele return back to the apartment and try to clean up and stage the scene. They do a selective cleanup of the crime scene. The next day, Amanda tried to get Philomena, the only other roommate in town at the time, back to the apartment to try to get her to be the one to discover the scene and be the one to call it into the police. But when Amanda called Philomena, Philomena was over half an hour away at a festival with a friend. So Amanda and Raffaele were forced to be the ones to call it into the police. But they didn't call it in until after the Carabinieri had already arrived to return the lost phones. The sex game gone wrong theory was not presented at the primary trial, nor were Amanda and Raffaele ever convicted on the sex game gone wrong theory. The motive presented by the prosecution was that a fight, most likely over Meredith's missing rent money, got out of hand.
At first, the prosecutors spun a theory that Amanda, Raffaele, and a local man, Rudy Gaudet, viciously murdered Meredith during a drug-fueled sex orgy that went horribly wrong. But in closing arguments last week, the prosecutor introduced a brand new motive, that Amanda was angry with her roommate. The two girls got into a fight over money, he said, and Amanda slit Meredith's throat with a kitchen knife.
It would be hard for prosecution to prove drug usage when presenting a motive for Meredith's murder. Amanda, Raffaele, and Rudy weren't immediately drug tested after the murder. Amanda and Raffaele weren't arrested until 5 days after the murder. Rudy wasn't apprehended until 19 days later. When Amanda and Raffaele were drug tested, only trace amounts of narcotics were found in their hair. Not even enough to identify what drug it was for. While certain drugs can stay in your hair for up to 3 months, a study done by the National Institute on Drug Abuse reported that those who self-reported marijuana use, only 52% of the tests were accurate, only 65% were accurate for cocaine, 24 for amphetamines, and 2.9 for opioids. This study concluded that hair testing is not an effective method of drug testing for moderate drug users. Now, many people have claimed to have purchased drugs from Rudy and have said that he was a low-level drug dealer, but he had no criminal charges for drugs at the time. Now, the problem with Giovanna Popovic's testimony. Giovanna Popovic was a defense witness at trial. She testified to seeing Amanda and Raffaele at his apartment the night of the murder, not once, but twice. Popovic was a Serbian exchange student who lived on Corso Garibaldi and had known Raffaele for about a year and a half. She said that the night of November 1st, she stopped by Raffaele's twice. The first time she stopped by was at 5:45 p.m. to ask Raffaele to drive her to the bus station to pick up a suitcase of clothes her mom was sending her from Milan. Now, Giovanna was from Serbia, but her mom was living in Milan at the time. The suitcase of clothes was for an upcoming trip to Serbia. Raffaele agreed to drive her to the station. Giovanna then left to go to an evening music class, which this night is All Saints' Day, a national religious holiday. So I kind of find it hard to believe that you would be having any class after 5 p.m. But anyway, after class, Giovanna stopped by around 8:40 p.m. to say that she didn't need the ride after all. Her mom wasn't able to ship the suitcase. And I guess she didn't really need the suitcase of clothes all that bad because Giovanna then leaves for Serbia on November 3rd, the day after Meredith's body is discovered, and she stays in Serbia for a week and a half. On November 12th, 2007, so 6 days after Amanda and Raffaele were arrested, Giovanna is now back in Perugia and goes to the police station and tells them about stopping by Raffaele's twice that night. Now, Giovanna's testimony was considered reliable, and the prosecution even included it in their timeline of the crime. But Giovanna's testimony doesn't really do much to help Amanda or Raffaele. It doesn't provide the two an alibi for the time of the murder. Giovanna said she last saw the two at around 8:40 p.m., and prosecution believed that this crime happened later in the night after 11 p.m. And I find it very odd that Amanda and Raffaele never mentioned Giovanna stopping by the apartment in any of their initial statements to the police. They don't even bring her up until trial when their defense tried to use her as an alibi witness. I find it extremely odd that Amanda never mentions Giovanna in any of her multiple written statements accounting what she did the night of the murder. Amanda rambles in her writings detailing the most minor details about the night, like her and Raffaele playing a game of making funny faces at each other. So I just don't know how she would fail to mention a friend of Raffaele's stopping by the apartment not once, but twice. So, since Amanda and Raffaele never initially brought up Giovanna to the police, it could mean that it didn't happen that night. Maybe it actually happened a different night, and that's why neither brought it up. But Giovanna is insistent that it happened the night of November 1st, stating her mom called her about the suitcase being sent the day before and the day of. She stated that the bus from Milan to Perugia came in every Thursday night at midnight. So the other option is maybe there's a reason Raphael and Amanda didn't want police to know about Giovanna stopping by. Maybe the interactions weren't as innocent as Giovanna claims them to be. It's also quite convenient. Giovanna's story gives an innocent explanation for stopping by Raffaele's twice and also makes her trip to Serbia the day after Meredith's body is discovered a pre-planned trip. Harouk and Kokomani. Now, I've talked about Harouk and Kokomani quite a bit in my previous videos. Prosecution put a lot of stock into Kokomani's testimony and labeled him a super witness. At trial, Kokomani was a terrible witness. He didn't speak very clear Italian, and most of his trial transcript just says incomprehensible. The Micheli court and the Massey court both deemed Kokomani an unreliable witness, and his testimony played no part in any of the three's convictions. In 2009, just before he was set to testify against Amanda and Raffaele, he would be arrested on low-level drug dealing charges. He was led into the court wearing a baseball cap and a hoodie, with the hood cinched up under his chin, completely concealing his face. Once he got to the stand, the judge and other court officials kept having to tell him not to be so nervous and to speak up so he could be heard. Kokomani said that either the night of November 1st or October 31st, he was coming from South Giuseppe Street and driving down the road that passed Via della Pergola 7. But just before coming up to the cottage, he saw what he initially thought were black bags laying in the middle of the road. He honked his horn and lightly bumped the objects with his car, and suddenly popped up a couple that he would later identify as Amanda and Raffaele. Raffaele approached the side of the car. Feeling threatened, Kokomani said he opened his car door and punched Raffaele in the face, knocking his glasses off. Kokomani said Amanda had a black scarf and that she was partially covering her face with it. Amanda then asked Raffaele something along the lines of if he made it. Kokomani said he had a container of olives sitting in his front passenger seat, so he grabbed a handful and threw them in Amanda's face. Amanda screamed, and then from a large green purse, she pulled out a large kitchen knife. And with both hands, she held it above her head and in Italian yelled, "Come here and I'll show you." Raffaele came up to Kokomani's car and said, "Leave it alone. What can a girl do to you?" Kokomani tried to take a picture of Amanda with his cell phone, but she quickly turned her face, and he ended up getting a dark, blurry picture of Raffaele instead. Kokomani said he deleted the picture from his phone later. This was in 2007, so cell phone camera quality, not the greatest. Kokomani then got back in his car, and from his rolled down window, he told the couple to go to hell, that he was Albanian and he wasn't afraid of them. He drove a little further down the road when he saw a black guy starting to walk up to Amanda and Raffaele. Amanda and Raffaele yelled to the black guy that Cocomani was Albanian. The black guy yelled back, "What do you want? I'm not Tutsian, I'm black. You can't do anything to me." Cocomani could hear Amanda telling the two men with her not to show Cocomani their faces, or else he might recognize them. Cocomani said that the black guy seemed out of his mind. Amanda was still holding the knife. Raffaele was now standing on the hillside below the road, so Cocomani could only see his head and torso. Not seeing Raffaele's hands continued to make Cocomani feel uneasy. He continued driving, thinking that they were dangerous. In prior statements, Cocomani said he came across a broken down car and a tow truck in the middle of the street, that he had to back up and pull over near the trash cans near the cottage in order to let the tow truck through. The trash cans were a little bit up the way from the driveway entrance to the cottage. When Cocomani was near the trash cans, that's when the black guy approached Cocomani's car and said, "Hey, aren't you the boy from the farm? Don't you remember me? I'm your cousin." Cocomani then recognized Rudy, saying that Rudy had come by the Terra Rosa farm stay Cocomani had previously worked at. Cocomani jokingly called Rudy cousin back, saying he actually had a cousin who was named Rudy. Cocomani asked Rudy if he knew the crazy couple standing behind them and asked why the girl was carrying a knife. Rudy said yeah, he knew them and to not worry. They were having a birthday party and the knife was for a cake they were about to cut. Cocomani heard what sounded like banging on wood coming from the cottage. Rudy told him it was just music from the party. But it didn't sound like music to Cocomani, and it didn't look like any parties were going on inside. Rudy then asked Cocomani if he could borrow his car for the night, because he needed it to move some furniture. Rudy first offered 100 euros, then 200, and then 250. Cocomani refused each offer, believing Rudy was trying to get him out of the car and to leave him alone with Amanda and Raffaele, who were still acting sketchy AF. Cocomani told Rudy he couldn't help him with a move tonight, but he would help him during the day tomorrow. Cocomani started to drive off, but when he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw Raffaele running towards the car with a pocket knife in his hand. He said Raffaele followed his car all the way up to the stoplight in the Piazza Germana. Cocomani first went to a bar in Elise called I'm not going to pronounce this bar. He went to a bar in Elise but found it was closed, so he instead went to the bar Fritz. When Cocomani got there, he saw some Albanian acquaintances who he told about seeing two people with knives on the side of the road. He tried to show them the blurry picture of Raffaele, but none of them believed him and told Cocomani to forget about it. Calling the police wouldn't do anything but cause more trouble. A couple days later, Cocomani heard a girl had been murdered in the area. Cocomani would also say in the days after Meredith's murder, before Rudy had been apprehended, he had been drinking at a bar when two fellow Albanian men came in looking for another unknown Albanian who had apparently seen everything the night Meredith was murdered. They were offering 100,000 euros to find this Albanian. They needed to keep him quiet. Cocomani immediately felt nervous. He knew that they were talking about him, and he thought that they would do whatever it took to keep him quiet. During an interrogation with Cocomani and lead prosecutor Giuliano Mignini and lead investigator Monica Napoleoni, he would say that the two men were connected to Raffaele's attorney, Luca Maori, and he did eventually name the two men as well. Cocomani fled back home to Albania shortly after and did not return to Perugia until January. Cocomani first came forward to the police on January 18, 2008, with a lawyer present to tell his story. At trial, Cocomani's lawyer would also testify almost as a character witness for Cocomani, telling how Cocomani had come to him to ask for help. Ultimately, Kokomani was just too terrible of a witness at trial. He mumbled a lot, he was hard to understand, and his story didn't make any sense. I mean, how can you mistake two people in the middle of the road for bags and then throwing olives in Amanda's face? His testimony was deemed unreliable by the Michelli and the Massey courts. Now, most people write off Kokomani's statements as utter nonsense, but there is some evidence that does corroborate it. Kokomani's cell phone activity placed him in the vicinity of Pergola 7, both on the night of October 31st and the night of November 1st. And a car had broken down in front of Pergola 7 the night of the murder, November 1st. Kokomani had told investigators he had to maneuver around a broken down car and tow truck while he was driving past the cottage. The tow truck driver, Gianpaolo Lombardo, arrived to the broken down car sometime after 11 p.m. and noticed the driveway gate at Pergola 7 ajar and a dark colored car parked in the driveway but outside the driveway gate that night. Kokomani drove a dark blue 1991 Volkswagen Golf. Prosecution would also present another questionable witness at trial, Fabrizio Giuffretti, a university researcher who came forward a year after the murder. He would testify that on October 30th, 2007, around 5 p.m., he was parking his car at the lot directly across from Bergola 7, and he would see Amanda, Raffaele, Meredith, and a black man he's 99% sure was Rudy walking from the cottage's driveway. Giuffretti says that he's certain of the date because while he was at the parking garage, he had to leave a note for a car that he accidentally scratched, leaving his contact and insurance information. He says that he saw them so clearly and he remembers everyone had on dark colored clothing except for Amanda, who wore a red coat with big 60s style buttons. When asked why it took so long for him to come forward, he said he didn't see the relevance of it until talking about it with a professor who urged him to report his sightings to investigators. Giuffretti would also be deemed an unreliable witness as well. The lone wolf theory. The lone wolf theory is what Judge Massey would later dub the single attacker scenario in his report released after his verdict. Amanda and Raffaele's defense teams would both hire different forensic experts that came to the conclusion that Meredith had been attacked by a lone assailant and that the wounds were inflicted by one knife, a small pocket knife. Sollecito's defense team would hire Francisco Antrona, a professor of forensic medicine at the University of Bari. Bari is also Raffaele's hometown. Antrona came to the conclusion that Meredith had died between 9:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. He believed Meredith's wounds were inflicted by one knife with a blade that was only about 3 to 3.5 inches long. Antrona insisted that Meredith's room was too small for three attackers to have carried out the crime. And while I wouldn't define Meredith's room as spacious, it did have an open area in the center of the room. Prior to Antrona's testimony, the judges and jury had visited Pergola 7. 7 people, including the 6-person jury, all stood in Meredith's room, dried blood still on the floor, over a year after the crime. If 7 people could stand fairly comfortable in Meredith's room, then 3 people could have attacked Meredith in that same space. At trial, Antrona enlisted the help of 2 female lawyers to act out his theory of the attack. In the video, you see Antrona speaking, the jury behind him to the left, Amanda and her defense team behind him to the right. Antrona believed that Meredith had been undressing at the time and was already naked from the waist down when the assailant entered and attacked her from behind with a flick-style pocket knife, grabbing Meredith by the mouth first, inflicting the finger-shaped bruises while threatening her with the knife to her cheek. The attacker then lowered his hands to Meredith's neck, still threatening her with a knife. He sexually assaults Meredith. Eventually, the attacker would force Meredith down to her hands and knees, grabbing her by the jaw and threatening her with the knife. The attacker holds Meredith in place with his legs, cutting her bra off, then stabbing her several times in the neck. Introna specified that Meredith had to be undressing at the time her attacker entered the room because he recognized it's impossible for a single attacker to have restrained Meredith to the point she wasn't able to fight back, while simultaneously removing her clothes to assault her. The only way one person could have pulled this off is if Meredith had already been undressed at the time of the attack. The coroner, Dr. Luca Lawley, concurred under cross-examination during the 2009 trial that if a sexual assault had taken place during the Meredith's attack, then more than one person had to have been involved. For Introna's theory to be plausible, Meredith would have effectively had to put up little to no resistance during each transition of the attack. She had very minor cuts on her hands and practically no signs of defensive wounds. There wouldn't even be DNA found under her nails, which you would assume would be there if she scratched her attacker. And given Meredith's personality, she was not a shy or a timid person. She had taken karate at 17. She could at least put up some sort of fight if her life depended on it. And her life did depend on it. And you don't have to be a martial arts expert in order to put up some fights if your life depended on it. In most lone assailant knife attacks of this nature, the victim will put up a fight. They often have multiple defense wounds on their hands, arms, and some even have their fingers severed from the natural instinct to grab at the knife blade coming at them. Meredith had no such injuries. Instead, Meredith mostly had bruises, showing that she had been violently restrained prior to her death. Amanda's defense hired forensic pathologist Carlo Torri. Torri concluded that the wounds had also been inflicted by only one knife that had a blade approximately 3 inches long. To explain the difference in size and orientation of the two fatal neck wounds, he stated that the smaller, narrow wound was caused by the knife being plunged in. The larger gaping wound was caused by the attacker moving the knife back and forth after plunging it into Meredith's neck. Opposite of Introna, who believed Meredith had been attacked from behind and forced on her hands and knees, Torri believed Meredith had been facing her attacker and that she had been laying on her back when she was stabbed. Amanda and Raffaele were presenting a joint defense, and for them to each present a conflicting expert would just weaken their argument in the judges' and jury's eyes. While Raffaele and Amanda were being tried together and were essentially presenting a joint defense, Raffaele's lead attorney, Giuliana Bongiorno, had originally wanted to present a separate defense for Raffaele. Raffaele had already said before that Amanda hadn't been at his apartment the entire night. Traces of DNA that contained a mixture of Amanda and Meredith's DNA were found in multiple areas throughout the apartment. Some were visible bloodstains, and others were only seen under luminol. They were found in Amanda and Meredith's shared bathroom, in the hallway between Meredith's room and that bathroom, and also in Philomena's room, the staged break-in room. While damning as that is, Amanda's DNA wasn't found in Meredith's room, but Raffaele's was, on Meredith's bra clasp, and the only person that could give Raffaele an alibi for the time of the murder was Amanda. If the two started turning on each other, things could turn real ugly real quick. The only way for Bongiorno to save Raffaele was to save both of them. During the trial, Bongiorno didn't throw Amanda under the bus, but she didn't go out of her way to defend her, at least not until closing arguments. During her closing arguments, Bongiorno justified Amanda's odd behavior as quirky and attributed it to Amanda being from Seattle. She said that Amanda wasn't Amanda the Ripper, but just the Amelie of Seattle, a clever reference to the movie that Amanda and Raffaele had watched the day of the murder. But at this point, it was too little too late. This had been an 11-month-long trial, and Bongiorno waited until closing arguments to try to stick up for her client's accused accomplice. On December 4th, 2009, a verdict was reached.
After 11 hours of deliberations, the verdict was read by the presiding judge. Amanda and Raffaele guilty of the murder of 21-year-old Meredith Kercher.
In the end, Amanda and Raffaele are found guilty on all charges except for the robbery charge. Raffaele is sentenced to 25 years, and Amanda is sentenced to 26. She received the additional year for her slander against Patrick Lumumba.
Well, they say it was a fair trial. The court says Amanda Knox and her boyfriend weren't convicted of murder because of bad publicity or odd behavior, according to a 427-page explanation of the case. But Knox was not the mastermind, and the crime was not premeditated. Explaining their verdict in the post-trial report, the judges and jurors said Amanda Knox didn't plan the murder of her British housemate, and it wasn't a killing inspired by hate. But they said the case against her was comprehensive and complete, and based on the evidence, her conviction last year was necessary. 21-year-old Meredith Kercher died of knife wounds in a pool of blood, and the report cites footprints at the scene and DNA traces linking Knox to the crime. The defense had called that evidence weak and inconclusive, but the judges and jurors had no doubt. The report suggests Knox tried to hide her guilt by tampering with the crime scene and by implicating someone else.
Per Italian law, within 90 days of the ruling, Judge Massey would release a 427-page-long report detailing the court's reasoning behind the convictions. And just to make a Harry Potter reference, since I know Amanda loves Harry Potter, the first book in the Harry Potter series is The Sorcerer's Stone. My edition of the book is 303 pages long. So the Massey report was 427 pages long. The report outlining the reasoning behind Amanda and Raffaele's convictions is over 100 pages longer than the first Harry Potter book. So whenever you hear people say that Amanda was convicted on no evidence and just odd behavior, I don't know how you could write a report over 400 pages long just based on that alone. Now, debunking the lone wolf theory. Massey thoroughly explained how the court concluded that this crime had to be carried out by multiple attackers. For the lone wolf theory to have worked, the attacker would have had to continually modify his mode of attack without Meredith putting up any sign of defense. He would have first had to restrain her by covering her nose, mouth, and at some point choking her with such force that it left significant bruising. Then the attacker would have had to switch their mode of attack to using a knife, and then ultimately stabbing Meredith on either side of the neck, and the wounds were consistent with coming from two different knives. Massey found it improbable that a lone assailant would have been able to keep her restraints in such a manner that she put up little to no sign of struggle while removing her clothes, cutting off her bra, and then assaulting her. The act of cutting off her bra would have required use of both of the attacker's hands. Meredith's bra was cut from behind, leaving her in a position to fight back had there only been one attacker. And Meredith had virtually no defense wounds. Massey concluded that the more narrow, fatal knife wound was not compatible with the pocket knife that was found on Raffaele at the time of his arrest, and had to have been inflicted by a knife that is yet to have been identified. The kitchen knife found at Raffaele's apartment, containing both Amanda and Meredith's DNA, could not be excluded, and he would rule that it was compatible with the larger left neck wound. Massey would rule that the testing that found both Amanda and Meredith's DNA on that knife to be reliable. Though it was a low copy number and it only had enough DNA to perform one test, the DNA found within the scratch on the side of the blade came back as Meredith's. Forensics believe the scratches on the side of the blade were consistent with someone vigorously scrubbing the knife clean. Massey notated the defense's argument that the results couldn't be considered reliable given that there wasn't enough DNA to perform additional testing, and that the DNA could have ended up there from contamination. This idea was dismissed given that no abnormal testing results had been yielded from any of the other pieces of evidence tested in this case. The staged break-in. When it came to Philomena's room, the court would rule that the break-in was staged by Amanda and Raffaele to throw suspicion off of their involvement in the crime. 2 luminol traces had been found in Philomena's room, one containing Meredith's and the other containing a DNA mixture of both a Meredith and Amanda. Massey believed that after washing Meredith's blood off of their hands and feet, Amanda then went to stage the break-in in Philomena's room. But she hadn't cleaned off all of Meredith's DNA, thus leaving behind traces. The small bathroom. Meredith's blood, Amanda's blood, and a mixture of both of their blood would be found throughout the bathroom that they shared. Meredith's blood was on the door frame and the light switch, indicating that her killers had gone to the bathroom and turned on the light to clean up. The blood on the bidet, the sink, and the Q-tip were tested and contained a mixture of Amanda and Meredith's DNA. The blood on the faucet contained only Amanda's DNA. The court interpreted these DNA mixtures as evidence of Amanda vigorously scrubbing Meredith's blood off of her hands and feet. Massey concluded that the partial bloody footprint on the bath mat belonged to Raffaele, based on the dimensions of the big toe, plantar arch, and placement of various bumps. The footprint on the bath mat was missing the heel, and there wasn't a corresponding heel print on the floor. And no other bloody bare footprints were found in the bathroom, indicating that the floor had been cleaned up. It was also notated that Rudy's visible bloody shoe prints were found directly leading out of Meredith's bedroom, down the hallway, and out the front door. Massey didn't believe that Rudy had taken his shoes off while at Pergola 7. When it came to the bra clasp, the court would reject the idea that Raffaele's DNA ended up there by contamination due to the delay in collection. The DNA found on the clasp was that of Meredith's and Raffaele's, and it was not in a low amount. The clasp would first be photographed on November 2nd, and the bra would be collected that day, but the clasp would not be collected until December 18th, 1.5 meters away from its original location. During this time, the apartment had been sealed off for the investigation. Raffaele's DNA was found in only one other place in the apartment, on a cigarette butt in the kitchen. Amanda and Raffaele's first appeal. After a last-minute change in judges, Amanda and Raffaele's appeal would be reviewed with presiding judges Claudio Hellman and Massimo Zanetti. Both had extensive experience dealing in civil case appeals, but this would be their first appeal for a murder case. Given the high profile of this case and the international media sensation, it seems odd that this case would be reviewed by judges who had absolutely no experience dealing with murder appeals. At this time, the Perugia District Court was dealing with judges either being transferred or retiring. The only judges available at the time that weren't Massey and Cristiani, who had presided over the primary trial, were Hellman and Zanetti, and thus they were assigned to handle the appeal. Many reported that it almost felt as if a conclusion had already been reached before the appeal trial even began.
But later this month, on November 24th, the appeal on the murder conviction gets underway. Are you thankful, Kurt, that this new judge is hearing this appeal and that he has a reputation for fairness?
Yes, very much so. It gives us that much more optimism to get a real conclusion and have an opportunity to bring Amanda home.
And Amanda's attorney told us this weekend that there's a greater opportunity for reversal in that appeal because in Italy, the scope is broader in the appeals process than it is here in the U.S.
At the primary trial, the defense hadn't been allowed to retest the DNA evidence on the kitchen knife or on Meredith's bra clasp. During the appeal, the court would appoint two different experts to retest the evidence: Carla Vedanocci and Stefano Conti, forensic specialists at the University of La Sapienza in Rome. They would retest the DNA evidence and investigate if the DNA could have potentially occurred from contamination, either through an unsecured crime scene or laboratory error. The independent testing and review would be a win in the eyes of the defense. For the double DNA knife, the testing confirmed that Amanda's DNA was indeed on the knife's handle. Due to the deterioration of the sample from previous testing, it wasn't able to confirm Meredith's DNA on the blade again. The review believed that Stefanoni hadn't followed proper procedure and shouldn't have gone forward with testing such a small sample size, believing the sample should have been big enough to run the test at least 2 to 3 times to confirm accuracy of the results. These experts couldn't rule out the possibility that Meredith's DNA result had occurred from contamination at the lab. Under cross-examination, when Conti was presented with the fact that the last time Meredith's DNA had been handled in the lab was 6 days prior to the knife being initially tested, Conti stated he wasn't aware of that fact at the time he wrote his report. When asked if it's likely that Meredith's DNA still could have ended up on the blade through laboratory contamination when there had been such a large gap in time since Meredith's DNA was last handled, he begrudgingly agreed that it wasn't highly likely, but still maintained that anything is possible. For the bra clasp, the testing confirmed Raffaele's DNA on the clasp. There's no way it could have ended up there through contamination at the laboratory, as it had been over 12 days since Raffaele's DNA had last been handled in the laboratory. But since the clasp hadn't been collected until 46 days later, Benocci and Conti stated that they couldn't rule out the possibility of Raffaele's DNA ending up there through crime scene contamination. Defense witnesses. For defense witnesses, Amanda and Raffaele's defense team would call 3 prison informants to testify. The first to testify was Mario Alisi, a 50-year-old convict who had previously been convicted of sexual assault but was currently serving a life sentence for kidnapping and murdering an 18-month-old child. Alisi had taken the child in hopes of collecting a ransom, but ended up murdering the child instead because they wouldn't stop crying. At the appeal, Alisi testified that in prison, Rudy told him that Amanda and Raffaele were innocent. Rudy said that he committed the crime along with another man who he only referred to as the drunkard. They attacked and killed Meredith. After fleeing the scene, the drunkard gave Rudy money so he could flee to Germany. The next informant was Marco Castelluccio, an inmate who was serving time on robbery charges, testified to overhearing Rudy say Amanda and Raffaele were innocent. And then there was Luciano Avilo, who was in prison on mafia-related charges. Luciano said Meredith had actually been killed by his brother Antonio and another man named Florio. The two had broken into the cottage while looking for a specific piece of artwork. They realized that they were in the wrong apartment and they saw Meredith in a nightgown and decided to assault and murder her. Avilo said that he hid Meredith's stolen keys for his brother and knew where the keys were hidden. If you believe all of these eyewitnesses are utter nonsense, you're not alone. But Amanda's lawyers stated that Avilo's testimony should at least be heard given that Meredith's keys were never found. It would be discovered that Avilo had provided false testimony in 9 other cases. His entire testimony is collectively considered unreliable. Now, you always have to take prison informant statements with a grain of salt, but I think all of these are ridiculous. And the fact that the defense actually put up 3 witnesses whose stories contradict one another's on the stand should highlight how weak their case actually was. Last but certainly not least, Rudy was called to testify. Rudy denied ever telling Alisi that he murdered Meredith. He said the two had spoken in prison, but it had just been chit-chat. Rudy denied ever saying Amanda and Raffaele were innocent while in prison. After Rudy's limited questioning, prosecutor Giuliano Mignini read from a letter Rudy had written to his lawyers a year ago, when the Alisi confession had first been leaked to the media. Rudy denied ever telling Alisi such things and ended the letter stating Meredith, a wonderful and splendid girl, was murdered by Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. Amanda's lawyer, Carlo Dalla Vedova, asked Rudy if he confirmed what he wrote in the letter. Rudy answered, I decided to write it after hearing absurd things and feeling like a puppet being manipulated by other people. It's not up to me to decide who killed Meredith. I've always said who was in the house that damned night. Dalla Vedova announced to the court, Rudy involving Amanda and Raffaele is news. Why did he never say this before? Rudy shot back. It's not as if there is my truth and the truth of Tom, Dick, and Harry. What there is the truth of what I lived through that night. Full stop. The questioning ended and Rudy was let out of the court. Once Rudy was out of the courtroom, Amanda addressed the court stating, I just want to say simply that the only time Rudy, Raffaele, and me have been together in the same place is in court. I'm shocked and anguished by his testimony. He knows we weren't there then. Amanda began to tear up halfway through the statement. Antonio Curatolo, the homeless man who had testified to seeing Amanda and Raffaele near the basketball court the night of the murder, was now in custody on drug-related charges, and his mental health had seriously deteriorated since the first time he testified. The appeal court determined that his new testimony invalidated his previous one. The appeal court would also deem Marco Quaintville's testimony invalid as well. Marco Quaintville was the shop owner who testified to have seen Amanda purchasing cleaning supplies the morning of November 2nd.
Hey, good morning, Russ. Let me show you the morning headline here. Take a look. It says, Guilty Amanda could flee forever. Nothing like unbiased coverage. Well, the retrial of the century here in Italy, involving the former honor student from Seattle, is nearing its end. Menini also claimed yesterday that the Knox family had what he called an escape plan for Amanda, should she be found not guilty.
I've heard scenarios of private jets and million-dollar deals and all this stuff, and this is complete fabrication. I don't know where this escape thing is coming from.
Escape? If Amanda Knox is found not guilty in this case, she's expected to take a commercial flight back home and be in Seattle on Tuesday or Wednesday. And for what it's worth, Russ, the sentiment here among Italian journalists is that both Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito will be found not guilty. While most of the evidence from the first murder trial has been dismissed, including DNA and eyewitness accounts, Amanda still must address her false confession to police in November 2007 that led to her arrest and the arrest of both her boyfriend and former boss, whom she implicated.
And then, surrounded by a phalanx of security officers, Amanda herself, somber and cloaked in an overcoat. In their final closing arguments, Knox's attorneys restate the core of their case. The DNA evidence used to convict her in the murder of her roommate Meredith Kercher had been discredited, and now Amanda must be freed. Next, Raffaele Sollecito, Amanda's former boyfriend and co-defendant, insisting that he never hurt anyone in his life. He shows the court a bracelet he has worn bearing the words, "Free Amanda and Raffaele." "I have worn this for 4 years," he said. "Today it is finally the day to take it off." Then the court falls silent as Amanda Knox rises to deliver her much-anticipated statement. The intensity of the moment almost overwhelms her. She is shaking as she struggles to get the words out. But as she continues, she seems to gain a bit of confidence. The young woman, described by her accusers as a she-devil and a shameless liar, now taking one final opportunity to speak for herself. I am paying with my life for something I haven't done, she said. I am not what they say I am. I am not perverted and violent. When we found out that Meredith had been killed, I couldn't believe it, she said. I couldn't believe it was possible. Then I felt fear. If I had been there that night, I would be dead also. She said, I shared my life with Meredith. We were friends. She was concerned for me. She was always kind to me. She cared about me. She was murdered, and I always wanted justice for her. I have not murdered, she said. I have not raped. After 4 desperate years, I insist I am innocent. I want to go home. I want to go back to my life. I don't want to be punished. I deserve freedom. After 10 minutes, Knox sits down, drained from the effort. She's escorted back to prison as court adjourns, and the jury of 2 judges and 6 civilians begins deliberations. Outside, Meredith Kercher's family implores the media not to forget the victim.
Meg has been almost forgotten in all of it. That's why we're here today, really, just to be present and remember Meredith in the city that she loves.
The Kerchers have always said they believe in the original verdict.
We were satisfied with that last time. Nothing's changed since then. It's still exactly the same. They're obviously entitled to their appeal. That's how the Italian justice system works.
When night falls on these narrow, winding streets, Perugia looks less of an Umbrian postcard and more like the setting of a gruesome murder. It is against this sinister backdrop that the jury returns with a verdict after 9 hours of deliberations. Moments before the verdict, the body language in court is a study in contrasts. Prosecutor Menini confidently embracing the Kercher family. Knox herself trembling with anticipation, clearly having trouble keeping her emotions in check.
Sostenuta nel presente grado da Patrick Dia Lumumba.
The first statement from the judge is actually bad news for Amanda. She's found guilty of slandering her former boss, bar owner Patrick Lumumba, when she fingered him for the murder during a controversial statement to police that she later retracted. But then...
Assolve entrambi gli imputati dai reati loro scritti ai capi A, B, C e D.
Acquittal on the murder charges. The jury demanding that Amanda and Raffaele must be released immediately. And despite the judge's repeated demands for silence, the crowd cannot contain its emotions.
Silenzio! Silenzio, per favore! Silenzio!
The stunning reversal of fortune is too much for the 24-year-old to bear. She breaks down in court, tears streaming as she is hustled away.
Amanda is extremely satisfied and she's looking forward to have a future back home. She's looking to go back as soon as possible.
In accordance with Italian law, Judge Hellman would release his report within 90 days of the ruling, detailing the reasoning behind the court's decision. The 144-page-long report would come to a drastically different conclusion than that of the previous judges. Hellman would rule that Rudy's conviction that concluded that he acted with Amanda and Raffaele could not be used against the two, as Rudy's trial had gone through the fast-track process. So even though the other courts concluded Raffaele committed the crime along with Amanda and Raffaele, that ruling couldn't be used against the two. Hellman would conclude that Amanda was guilty of slandering Patrick Lumumba. She knew she was naming an innocent man, but she only named him after being exhausted by long and obsessive interrogations without a lawyer present. Hellman would say that Amanda falsely accusing Patrick couldn't be used as evidence against her for involvement in the crime. Hellman would conclude that Rudy was unreliable and that the only reliable statement he made was during his November 19, 2007 Skype chat with his friend Giacomo Bonetti, where he initially said that Amanda wasn't there. Hellman would conclude the defense witnesses presented during the appeal, all those lovely prison informants, were unreliable. But he couldn't use the defense presenting these prison informants as evidence against the defendants. Hellman would also conclude that the witnesses presented at the original trial, Antonio Curatolo and Marco Quaintville, were unreliable. Hellman would also conclude that the witnesses who claimed to have heard a loud scream the night of the murder were unreliable as well, and that their testimony also couldn't be used against the defendants. Hellman would also side with the defense that the DNA evidence on the bra clasp and Meredith's DNA on the knife were from contamination and couldn't be used against the defendants either. As for the bloody footprint on the bath mat, Hellman said that it most likely belonged to Rudy, not Raffaele. And for the break-in in Philomena's room, he would come to the conclusion that it wasn't staged, but how Rudy actually entered the apartment that night. He would conclude that Amanda and Raffaele's alibis couldn't be confirmed. Hellman's conclusion stated, "It isn't up to this court to state what really happened, nor whether one or more person carried out the crime, nor whether other investigative scenarios were neglected. What this court notes is only the lack of proof of the guilt of the accused. The sudden decision of two good, well-meaning young people to do evil for evil's sake and for other reason is all the more incomprehensible because it aims to help Rudy, with whom they had no relationship and whose character and social background is different from theirs, to commit a crime." So, in other words, why would Raffaele and Amanda, two white university students from good families, associate with a poor black kid? On the day the verdict was first announced, Amanda and Raffaele would immediately be released. Outside the courtroom, the Kercher family lawyer, Francisca Maresca, would give the statement, "This is not so much a defeat for the prosecution as a defeat for Italy's justice system. The judges said there is a lack of proof, and whoever acted with Guede has not been found." Only 2 days after giving the verdict, Hellman would go on to say that the court's verdict is the result of the truth that was created in the proceedings, but the real truth may be different. They may be responsible, but the evidence is not there. Hellman would also say that Rudy might not be the only person who knows what happened that night. He certainly knows and hasn't said anything. Maybe Amanda and Raffaele know what happened that night too. When questioned about the Italian backlash at the verdict, Hellman said he believed that many had made up their minds about Amanda's guilt, mostly stemming from her being American. And this acquittal came as a shock to many, the Kercher family especially. It had been widely expected that at the most, a retrial would be ordered, even if the convictions were overturned. But instead, the judge moved to bypass a retrial and definitively cleared the two defendants. Amanda and Raffaele's acquittals feel like a cop-out to me. The courts didn't prove that they were innocent. They just threw out all the witnesses and DNA evidence and said it was all unreliable. That they didn't know what happened to Meredith. They didn't need to explain to you what actually happened to Meredith. And you know what? Maybe Amanda and Raffaele were involved. In March 2013, upon review by Italy's Supreme Court, the Court of Cassation, they would find the annulment of Amanda and Raffaele's charges to be unsafe and reinstated the convictions, and they would order a second appeals trial. This time they would allocate the case to a Florence court to be oversaw by judges Alessandro Nacini and Luciana Chiricchia, and these judges actually had experience dealing with criminal cases. In January 2014, the appeal court would order additional DNA testing to be done on the knife. Avilo, the witness presented during the first appeal trial, would come forward to recant his previous testimony against Rudy. And on top of that, Amanda would fail to appear in court and stayed in America and sent a long email to the judges explaining her innocence. Many speculated that Amanda was worried she would be reconvicted, and if she was found guilty again, Italy would then have to extradite her back. Judge Nacini and Chiricchia would find Amanda and Raffaele guilty of Meredith's assault and murder. Amanda's slander conviction against Patrick Lumumba was upheld as well. They increased Amanda's sentence from 26 years to 28.5, while Raffaele's sentence stayed at the original 25. The day after the conviction, Raffaele and his girlfriend were detained at a hotel in Vinzone, about 25 miles away from the Austrian border. Police arrived at the hotel and confiscated Raffaele's passport and listed that he was unable to travel. Prosecution and police feared Raffaele might flee to the Dominican Republic. Twice during the 2013 appeals proceedings, Raffaele openly traveled to the Dominican Republic, rumored where his uncle, Rocco Sollecito, was. And considering who Rocco Sollecito was, some speculated Raffaele was going on these trips to send a message to the courts. Even though Amanda and Raffaele were both reconvicted, they weren't immediately sent back to prison. Instead, the Court of Cassation would first review the findings of the Second Appeal Court and determine whether or not the verdicts would be upheld. In February 2015, just a month before the Court of Cassation was set to review the reconvictions, Raffaele would go on to give an interview to a local Italian news talk show, Porta a Porta. When he recounted what happened the night of the murder, he would say that he stayed at his apartment the entire night, but he couldn't vouch for Amanda. She had left around 8:30 to 9 p.m. the night of the murder to return back to her home. He said that he fell asleep and he wasn't sure what time Amanda came back to the apartment. Most of the night was hazy to him as he had smoked a joint before going to sleep. When asked during this interview, Raffaele would emphasize that Amanda had not slept over at his house that night. When asked if he thought Amanda killed Meredith, he answered no. It didn't seem likely to him. He says he would have noticed something. But he stated that these are Amanda's charges to answer to, not his. Raffaele was once again removing Amanda's alibi for the night of the murder. It's obvious Raffaele was terrified of going back to prison. Many American news sources started to report that Raffaele was starting to distance himself from Amanda, which he was obviously doing, and Amanda would write a blog post in response.
February 11th, 2014, weeks after an Italian court found her guilty for a second time, Amanda Knox held a sign in Italian saying, "We are innocent." All along, Knox's boyfriend at the time, Raffaele Sollecito, has defended Amanda, saying neither of them had anything to do with the death of Meredith Kercher. Recently, though, as he faces the prospect of prison once again, signs he could be distancing himself a bit. In a recent interview on AC360, he had this to say.
There's nothing against me, and nothing very strong against Amanda. And in my case, I really did nothing wrong, and I don't want to pay for someone else's peculiar behavior.
At the time, the two had been dating about a week. Amanda Knox is downplaying any suggestion her ex-boyfriend is distancing himself from her. She posted on her blog a recent email exchange received from Sollecito, where he writes, quote, "I don't want to be punished for, nor have to continue to justify those things that regard you and not me. Obviously, the evidence demonstrates both of our innocence, but it seems that for the judges and the people, this objectivity is of no importance." Knox describes Sollecito as a scapegoat used by Italian prosecutors. Quote, "The only reason he has been dragged into this is because he happens to be my alibi." Also, quote, "He is collateral damage in the unreasonable, irresponsible, and unrelenting scapegoating of the prosecution's grotesque caricature that is Foxy Knoxy." Late today, Sollecito's attorney gave us this statement, saying, "It's imperative that the Italian courts consider Raffaele's case separate from Amanda's case. By necessity, he has to distance himself and his case from Amanda and her case. The facts and the evidence with regard to each of them is entirely different." Sollecito and Knox are both appealing the new convictions, which carry sentences of 25 and 28 years, respectively.
On March 25th, 2015, the Court of Cassation ruled to immediately annul the ruling of the Second Appeal Court as well.
Supreme Court just overturned the murder conviction of the American Amanda Knox. Let's bring in our CNN contributor, Barbie Nadeau. She's the Rome bureau chief for the Daily Beast. She's joining us right now from Rome. Tell us how this went down, Barbie.
Well, it was a day of heavy anticipation. The five judges deliberated for hours and hours, about 5 hours more than we expected them to come down with a verdict that really no one expected, in the sense that we understood they would either uphold the conviction or they could send it back for a retrial. For the court to completely throw out the conviction, the High Court, is not how it's generally done. It wasn't sort of in the list of options that we thought was going. But I guess what it does more than anything is underscore the complexity of this case, and really just how, you know, the case went from acquittal to conviction back to acquittal to conviction, and this High Court just thought, I guess, fine, enough is enough. Let's stop the case where it is. There's just simply too much reasonable doubt to try to get to try to uphold any sort of conviction on this case.
Instead of reviewing all of the evidence presented in the original court proceedings, they only reviewed a fraction of it. The Court of Cassation specified in their report that simply just being present at Pergola 7 at the time of the crime and taking part in committing the crime were two different things, and that being present was not proof of guilt. Other than the bra clasp, there were no traces of DNA of either Amanda or Raffaele's in Meredith's room where the crime took place, but there were multiple traces of Rudy's in Meredith's room. The Court of Cassation ruled it was highly unlikely for Amanda and Raffaele to have participated in the murder without leaving behind any DNA, though the court did believe there was a selective cleanup and staging of the rest of the apartments. In the Court of Cassation's report, they stated that Amanda's presence in the home at the time of the murder was a proven fact at trial and was in accordance with Amanda's own statements. When she falsely accused Patrick of the crime, she said she was in the kitchen and heard Meredith scream. The court believed Amanda's accusation of Patrick contained guilt knowledge, stating Amanda knew Meredith was assaulted before the police knew. At the time of her accusation, the autopsy report had not yet come back. In Amanda's accusation, she said she heard Meredith's screams. The witnesses who later testified to hearing a loud scream the night of the murder had not yet come forward to police at this time. The court stated that the mixed DNA traces in the smaller bathroom was proof Amanda had Meredith's blood on her and washed it off. They believed that the mixed traces was Meredith's diluted blood and Amanda's skin cells. They stated the evidence was suspicious, but not decisive. They could not determine when Amanda had come into contact with Meredith's blood. The Court of Cassation's report stated, it may also show a posthumous touching of that blood during the probable attempt of removing the most visible traces of what had happened, maybe to help cover up for someone or to steer away suspicion from herself, but not contributing to full certainty about her direct involvement in the murderous action. The court also agreed that there was a probable selective cleanup in the apartment and that the break-in was staged. The court agreed that the only DNA trace linking Raffaele to the crime was the DNA on the bra clasp, which they would deem unreliable based off of Conti and Betanocci's testimony in the first appeal trial. The court ruled that the footprints at the crime scene believed to have come from Raffaele could not be proven with certainty. It was only probable that they were his. While the court took this into consideration, they still ruled that if Amanda was there that night, it was most likely Raffaele was there as well. The court also discounted Meredith's DNA on the double DNA knife and multiple eyewitness testimony. While the court ruled that Amanda and most likely Raffaele were at the cottage at the time of the murder and that Amanda washed Meredith's blood off of her, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that they took part in the murder. They annulled the second appeals court's verdict, and a third appeal trial was not remanded. Like, I'm sorry, is tampering with evidence, altering a crime scene, and staging a break-in not also crimes? Like, the court says, oh, we can't prove Amanda was in Meredith's room, we can't prove that they took part in the murder, but we can prove she committed this litany of other crimes afterwards. The Court of Cassation's whole report focuses on there's no evidence that places Amanda in Meredith's room. And I just kept reading this report, waiting for them to bring up the lamps. And they never bring up the lamps. And I think that that is a huge piece of circumstantial evidence that places Amanda in Meredith's room the night of the murder. So in Meredith's room, they would find two lamps, one under the head of the bed. The one under the head of the bed was Meredith's table lamp. They would also find another lamp under the foot of the bed. That was proven to be Amanda's. And it kind of looked like someone had put the lamps there to try to get a better look underneath the bed. And there were also bloodstains on the floor near the bed that indicated that someone was searching for something under the bed after the murder. So Amanda had the smallest bedroom in the cottage, and her room was the only bedroom that did not have a working source of light. The small black table lamp was the only source of light in Amanda's entire room. Amanda's justification for how her lamp possibly ended up in Meredith's room is, well, maybe Meredith took it to use it to read. But this is something Meredith had never done before, and Meredith had multiple sources of light in her own room. She had a working overhead light, so like she had a light switch she can turn on, and she had a ceiling light. She had the small black table lamp, and she had a floor lamp. So why would Meredith go take her roommate's only source of light in order to read? And another thing that I find odd is Amanda has always been insistent that when she first arrived back to her home the morning of November 2nd, nothing was out of place or missing in her room. But there was something missing. The only source of light in her entire room. And Amanda says that she went back to her apartment the morning of November 2nd in order to shower and change her clothes. So, unless Amanda was in the habit of dressing in her room in total darkness, I find it odd that she didn't immediately notice her lamp was missing and that she never brought it up. And to this day, she's still insistent that nothing was out of place or missing in her room. Doesn't ever bring up the missing lamp. While a lot of people say the Court of Cassation, Italy's highest court, unequivocally exonerated Amanda and Raffaele, we can obviously see that's not true. They were acquitted on insufficient evidence, and the court still believed that they were there at the time of the murder and that Amanda washed Meredith's blood off of her. Regardless, this would still be a huge win for the defense. Amanda and Raffaele were to remain free. Meredith's family was devastated and confused by the court's final ruling. When leaving Italy after the final appeal, multiple people went up to the Kerchers to tell them that they were disgusted by the court's decision, and some even said it made them ashamed to be Italian. Across the pond, America was celebrating. The Italian Supreme Court's ruling had finally put an end to Amanda Knox's nightmare. Her wrongful conviction had been vacated by Italy's highest court. In January 2016, Raffaele would announce that he was seeking over 500,000 euros in damages for his wrongful conviction and 4-year imprisonment. He stated his family had spent over 400,000 euros in his legal expenses. The Florence court would reject his claim. They agreed that in light of his acquittal, his imprisonment was unjust, but that Raffaele was at least responsible for it. They ruled that it was a result of his contradictory or even frankly untrue statements in the early stages of the investigation, which were intent or gross negligence of his own doing, which eliminated his right to compensation. Meaning, they believed Raffaele knowingly and willingly lied to investigators. In January 2018, Amanda would go before the European Court of Human Rights, alleging that she had been abused during her interrogation and that it had led to her falsely accusing Patrick Lumumba of Meredith's murder. The court would order Italy to pay Amanda 18,400 euros in damages, stating that Italy had violated her human rights by not providing her with a professional interpreter, stating that the interpreter that had been present had taken almost a motherly role towards Amanda. The court also ruled that there had been a delay in legal counsel when Amanda gave her 5:45 a.m. statement to the prosecution, but that didn't unfairly undermine the proceedings. Amanda had waived her right to an attorney prior to providing the statement. The court did not agree Amanda had been abused. Their press release stated that there was no evidence of the abuse of which Miss Knox complained. The European Human Rights Court believed that Amanda was a young girl, far away from home in a country which language she wasn't fluent in, and was vulnerable, but they did not believe she had been abused or mistreated, just that she should have been given a better interpreter and had a lawyer present. In 2022, thanks to an Italian judicial reform, any cases that had previously reached a definitive verdict could be reopened if human rights violations had been found. In 2024, Amanda was reconvicted of her slander charge against Patrick Lumumba and was ordered to pay Patrick's legal fees and damages. I wasn't able to find how much she was ordered to pay him this time, but she had been previously ordered to pay him $60,000, which Amanda has yet to pay, and I doubt she ever will. To this day, Amanda and Raffaele maintain their innocence and claim that they had nothing to do with Meredith's murder and that they weren't present at the apartment at the time when it happened. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here today. This concludes part 5. I will only be doing one more video on this case, and I will just take you through the popular theories, and then I will give you my thoughts on the case and what my specific theory is. If you watched this entire video, and if you've watched my other 4 on this case, you probably already have a good idea of where my thought process is, but nonetheless, I will still tell you all my thoughts on it. If you enjoyed this video and would like to follow along for more, please like and subscribe. But other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your night, and bye for now.